Good afternoon, everyone. Just out. Thank you for joining and taking the time out of your day. I appreciate you're all busy people. The plan over the next 20 minutes or so is for me to share with you some knowledge, top tips, and best practice around Cyber Essentials Plus. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions using the section on the right-hand side of your screen. And I'll try and save a few minutes at the end to go through those. Hopefully keep you no more than 20-25 minutes or so you can go and enjoy some sunshine if you're lucky enough to be where I am on your lunch and get some fresh air. Other bits of housekeeping: the webinar's being recorded, so we'll send you a copy this afternoon along with anyone who's been unable to make the session. My name's Tom Lyes, head of engagement at Lawyer Checker. A little bit of background about Lawyer Checker in case you're not aware of who we are. We're used on 1 in 4 residential conveyancing transactions in the UK to help prevent funds transfer fraud. And we've also been an IASME approved assessment centre since January 2019 for Cyber Essentials Plus. For those of you wondering, we are also ourselves certified against ISO 27001 and Cyber Essentials Plus. So we certainly practice what we preach. We aim to be the go-to business for law firms when it comes to keeping your business safe. I manage key relationships and have been with the business since the start of its journey. So hopefully today I'll be able to share some real experiences and knowledge on what we've learned during that time. So in terms of some of the things we're going to cover, I want to start by looking at the benefits to the wider business of having Cyber Essentials Plus. And we'll then look at what it is, what's involved in the process of accreditation, some of the common things we see, which I think will be useful if you're considering this, how you go about choosing an assessor, and then who is involved in that process, how long it should take, and how much you should budget. So business benefits. So Cyber Essentials Plus is obviously derived from the National Cyber Security Centre, which is born out of GCHQ. They comment on the fact that by getting Cyber Essentials Plus accredited, you should be able to protect your organization from 80% of common threats. The principle behind doing this is all about marginal gains and being excellent at the basics, which is a really commonly used principle in other areas. So those of you like me who are sport mad may know of a chap that used to work for UK Cycling called Dave Brailsford. He talked about marginal gains and was one of the key reasons that the GB team was so successful at the London Olympics in 2012, really focusing on the small things that when added up, they make a huge difference. And that's really what the National Cyber Security Centre is saying, is being brilliant and being really good at the basics is really valuable. One of the things that I think is cropping up more and more, and this is really relevant to our sector, is firms are telling us that they see a lot of benefit in having a badge on the website. They see increased credibility and reputation from this. So I think especially with a lot of the transparency stuff that's going around, consumers are looking more at law firms' websites, and having that badge shows customers that you take this seriously. And I think that's really important, especially if your competitor is doing it. They may ask the question, why has one got it and why has one not? Also, if you're working with other businesses as a law firm, then the supply chain may often ask that you are Cyber Essentials accredited. Anybody who works with the government has to go through that in terms of their procurement process. So I think the whole point around credibility and a reputation has really grown around this in the last 12 to 18 months as knowledge has grown at the same time. One of the most common bits of feedback that we get post-assessment from our law firms is that even for those firms that have in-house IT or most relevantly, those who outsource either an element or part of their IT, people tell us how valuable the process is for them to assess that relationship and the strength of that relationship, and is it as strong as it should be. Now, that's obviously really logical when you outsource your IT, especially if you're outsourcing it to a company that maybe isn't legal sector specific. Going through this process will give you much greater confidence, especially when you're sat at board level and in management meetings, that you know that relationship is right. And even in-house, if you've got an in-house IT team, the principle of auditing your IT is no different to you auditing your accounts or your conveyancing files. The principle of doing that is exactly the same. And also remember that IT and cyber are two separate skill sets. You may have an excellent IT team in-house, but they may not have that cybersecurity skill set, which is still quite sparse in terms of the overall sector. I think there's a real growing push amongst the regulators to mention this. So the word should is used in things like Lexcel and CQS, but I think the most powerful thing we've seen from the regulators, and I'll mention this a little bit later on in the webinar, is around what the SRA found in their thematic review of cybersecurity. So they were really clear in saying that the firms they visited that had Cyber Essentials Plus were in a better position to defend themselves and in a better position to prevent attacks in the future. And I think that's probably one of the most powerful pieces of regulator content I've seen. I think it helps the process of winning new contracts and tenders, especially those of you who might be dealing with the financial sector and working with lenders. This is going to become a prerequisite from them with regards to their supply chain. And I think it really helps IT leaders and other managers present how you're tackling the challenges of cyber at board level. So often cyber will feature on a board meeting or management meeting agenda. And I think one of the ways to really show other people in the business that you're taking this seriously is to have the accreditation and to have the badge. And I think that forms part of other things. It's not just a case of having the badge, but I think that's a really valuable way, especially if you're an IT manager and you're getting asked questions about what you're doing in this space, to be able to say to your MD or your CEO, this is what we're doing. We're accredited against best practice from the National Cybersecurity Centre. I think there's some real value in that. Okay, so Cyber Essentials Plus, what is it? So in terms of the certification, it's part of the Cyber Essentials scheme, and it's a more rigorous test than the basic version of your organization's cybersecurity systems. So those of you who are familiar with the basic assessment will know that this is a self-assessed questionnaire, which is completed via a portal. The difference is that Plus will see you still do that at the start of the journey, but then our qualified cybersecurity expert will carry out a remote audit to make sure that what is included in that assessment is right. So we'll do a vulnerability scan of internal and external IPs. We'll check a number of devices dependent on the size of the scope. And all that is being assessed against the guidelines. This is not our opinion on where you are. We are assessing you against National Cybersecurity Centre guidelines. And going back to what I said about the SRA, I think what they said around Plus was really powerful. I know the CLC are currently updating their risk outlook. And last year they mentioned Cyber Essentials Basic as something that firms should have in their risk outlook, and I suspect we may see an upgrade on that in the next one. It covers 5 key areas of vulnerability. So the basic assessment part and the scheme is designed to focus on these 5 areas. So going back to what I spoke about being brilliant at the basics, these are what the National Cybersecurity tend to think are the basics. So we've got firewall protection, we've got user secure settings for devices, and keeping devices and software up to date, and protecting your firm from viruses and malware. And we've also got controlling who has access to your data and services. I'm just going to skip to this. So some of the most common things that we see out of that, I've put together here. So one of the most common things that we see here is the out-of-date applications. So this is easily number one for law firms. Are you working with or using software that is no longer supported? If you are, these are a criminal's dream, and going through Cyber Essentials will help with that and help make sure that is in place. Not segregating admin accounts from standard user accounts. So it's quite an interesting one, because when you think about it, IT staff are maybe monitoring and dealing with things often browse web and email from admin accounts, which is inherently more dangerous. So the use of admin accounts, I think, is quite important. And we also see quite a lot of times where the antivirus is in place and that isn't set up to block attachments on download because too many file types have been whitelisted. So you potentially run the risk of exposing yourself that way. So I thought that would be useful just to share 3 or 4 quick learnings that we found over the last 18 months. In terms of the actual accreditation process, I think it's really useful if I sort of take you through what the typical journey of this looks like. And I just noticed the comment about the typo on the previous page, so I do apologize for that. So the accreditation process, how does it look? So at the point in which you decide that you want to become Cyber Essentials accredited, we would send you a contract which you would sign, and we sort out all the paperwork and the payment. What then happens is we'll make sure, and probably before that actually, that we provide you with the documentation and guides to help you prepare. So that might be for you to deal with in-house, that might be for you to supply your IT providers with, etc. What then happens is we will set you up via the IASME online portal. So here you'll start the basic version of Cyber Essentials, and you'll complete that online. And I'll come on to sort of timescales around that shortly. We will then try and mark that within 24 to 48 hours. If you need to make any fixes or remediations, you have 48 hours in which to do that. Now, that 48 hours is not set by us, it's set by the governing body. And most of the time, that with the way that we deliver our reports, we can be really clear to you as to how you can go about doing that and what you need to change to pass. So the 48 hours shouldn't be a problem. We can request extensions from the governing body if there's specific reason to do so. So we've never really found that to be a blocker. So once you've passed the basic, it's then a case of us looking to book in the remote audit. So what happens on the day of Cyber Essentials Plus assessment is we'll carry out a remote audit that uses a vulnerability scan, looks at internal and external IPs, admin accounts, and we'll also take a sample size of your devices dependent on what is set out in scope. I'll come on to scope in a second. We will then produce a report for you at the end of the day, and that report will tell you whether or not you've passed or failed. If you don't pass, don't worry, it's not an immediate fail and that's the end of that. In our report, we will go into as much detail about what you need to do to pass, and you then have a 30-day window in which you can carry out those remediations. Most of the time, remediations don't need us to come in and rescan. remediations can be confirmed by us visualizing something that might be a screenshot, etc., that we can then sign that off from our end to make sure that you've met the criteria that the National Cyber Security Centre gets. And then at the end of that, we'll hopefully be able to provide you with your certificate to show you that you've passed. In terms of choosing an assessor, we believe we're a really good fit for people in the legal sector. We know how law firms work. We understand the typical IT infrastructures and the internal processes. And because of our very much sector-specific focus, we should be able to help you achieve your accreditation quicker and with less stress, because this is what we focus on. And one of the questions that we often get is, can you help us with the journey of getting there? So making sure that we've got everything in place before we go through assessment. Yes, we can help with that. In-house, we have 2 or 3 assessors. So we offer consultancy where needed, and we can help firms along that journey. You just need to talk to us about that so we can understand what your requirements are. And within our technical audit and our gap analysis, if you follow our advice, we'll always ensure a guaranteed pass. We're here to help you pass the assessment, not to mark you as a fail. We're here to support you with that. And on to that extent, we really try and avoid unnecessary jargon and overcomplicated language. There are times where you have to use language like that, especially when you're maybe dealing with the technical person. But as a rule, we want to make sure that our reports are contextualized to a law firm, so that if the stakeholder who is dealing with the accreditation is not overly technical, different people at different stages can understand that. So it's really important the language we use around that is appropriate for the sector. And we worked quite hard on getting that right. Who needs to complete the assessment? So anybody in the business who is prepared or knowledgeable to talk about the company's IT and their policies and procedures relating to this. Those of you who do have outsourced IT providers, you may find that either your outsourced IT provider completes the assessment and is involved on the day of the plus assessment, or you may find you complete it, but there's a bit of two-way communication around that. We see sort of different things happen in that space. For those of you who have internal IT people, this is probably something that you want to align to a certain individual to run as a project. How long should it take? So we think the majority of our clients will spend about half a day completing the basic assessment. That's probably not in one go. So you can obviously save your answers and come back to it. And you may need to ask us along that journey, and you have the ability to do so. So the way a part of our process works is that when we set you up on the IASME portal, we'll introduce you to one of my colleagues who's responsible for the delivery of our work, and she'll be on hand to handhold throughout the process and answer any questions. And we typically say book out a day for the remote audit. And we'll normally start in the morning and be done by early afternoon. And it's really important that you provide us with the information that we ask for beforehand to make the day of the remote audit as easy and as straightforward as possible. I've got a question come in around scoping, which has been sent in. So there is an element of scoping behind Cyber Essentials Plus. The genuine rule is that IASME want you to include the whole business in scope. However, there are certain businesses where that may not be possible. And fortunately, the legal sector doesn't seem to be hugely affected by that. But if that is something that you've thought of in your considerations, the rules set behind that are that if you want to exclude a part of the business and remove them out of scope, they need to be clearly separated by a unique firewall boundary or a VLAN. and that's really black and white how IASME have set that out. So how much should we budget? So I see we have that question come in from Alan, who's requested that. So Cyber Essentials Plus is £1,200 plus VAT. This includes the basic fee for Cyber Essentials. For those of you who are maybe considering just the basic version, the cost of that is predefined by IASME, which is £300 plus VAT. And that's built into the £1,200 plus VAT figure. We normally find we're reasonably competitive where that's concerned. And another one of the bits of feedback that we often get as to why we're a good fit, RE, the assessor, is that we come at this from a completely fresh point of eyes. So we've had some firms who come to us this year who have previously used their IT providers to do the assessment. Now, you want the IT provider to do the front end of it, of course, because they understand your systems. But you really need to question as to whether you want an IT provider effectively doing the certification and accreditation part, because there's an element there of marking your own homework. So a lot of the clients that come to us because we're a fresh pair of eyes on that process. We've not been working with it for years. We're able to independently assess, which I think is really valuable. And certainly, if you've got an IT provider pushing you to use them for the assessment, that's the element that you really need to consider. And then I just thought I'd wrap up with a testimonial from one of our existing clients, which I'm not going to read out, but you can obviously see on the screen in terms of us helping them through the journey. Good news is we've managed to stay on time, which is great. That pretty much brings me to the end of the session, and I hope I've been able to share a lot of our learnings and experiences of Cyber Essentials Plus in terms of the liaison we've had with our clients over the last 2 years. And I hope that's been really helpful and giving you a better feel for what the process looks like, what's actually involved, and how that affects different parts of the business. A really good question from Andrew. So, is it sensible to do businesses with other firms holding Cyber Essentials Plus? Is a really good point, and something I did touch on, but only really briefly. So, when you're doing your due diligence on the business, this is the type of thing that you should be looking at. So you really should consider as to, depending on the type of work that you do, as to whether you want to do business with someone that doesn't have any cyber certification. So I think, in answer to your question, Andrew, yeah, it's really sensible, and that's a really good way of approaching it. With what we do at Lawyer Checker, we have a supplier questionnaire, and we will only engage with businesses if we feel they've got the appropriate accreditations that we can trust. And as a Microsoft first business, that's really important to us. Certainly we'll make the slides available. Let's see, I had a question there from Ruth. So Ruth, I'll make sure that you get a copy of those. My contact details I'll leave up on the screen. So if you'd like to look at becoming Cyber Essentials Plus certified, please contact me on those details, and I'll be happy to point you in the right direction with regards to the right channels within the business, so I can put you in touch there. And we'll also send an email out today which will have a copy of the recording on it, so you can share that for those people that didn't make it as well. A couple of other questions come in, and as we're on time, I'll answer them. How long does the accreditation last? It lasts 12 months, so it's an annual accreditation. So you're quite rightly to say if there are updates / recommended policy with the accreditation, does it need to be updated? So yeah, it's an annual accreditation. IASME haven't changed the criteria for a couple of years. Gut feeling suggests they may do in the next year or so to reflect homeworking a little bit more. And that's something I think we may see in the next 12 to 18 months. But we'll send a copy of the recording out later today. Please feel free to get in touch if you'd like to move forward. There'll also be an opportunity in that email for you to book a meeting with my colleague, who would be happy to sort of talk through any next steps for anybody that wants to move forward with this. Alternatively, just ping me an email, and I'll make sure that we come back to you today. So thanks for your questions. Thanks very much for joining. I appreciate you're all busy. I'll let you get back to your lunch times, and if you can, go and enjoy the sunshine and grab some fresh air. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.